Mhairi Lawson is a soprano who has worked worldwide with companies such as the English National Opera, New York City Opera, and the Early Opera Company in works by composers such as Monteverdi and Puccini. Her discography boasts music by Haydn, Schubert and Vivaldi, and also traditional classical Scottish music. Currently, Mhairi is Professor of Voice and Historical Performance Practice at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where she's also a PhD candidate researching vocal pedagogy in the publications of Domenico Corri. Thank you, Mhairi, and everyone else for joining us. Over to you.
So, slide 1, Robert Burns and the Slave's Lament, Engagement After Indifference, a song from 1792. In 1786, Scotland's national bard Robert Burns prepared to travel to Jamaica to work as a plantation manager. This suggests that Burns was not only indifferent to slavery in the colonies, but also a willing participant. However, in 1792, The Slave's Lament was published in Burns's and James Johnson's collection of 600 songs, the Scots Musical Museum, and this indicates perhaps an engagement in protest. This presentation will illustrate how some singers have responded to the song, and I will offer a bit of information about the Scots Musical Museum's context in late 18th century Edinburgh society, alongside some personal, editorial, musical, and historical observations. I'll confess now, as Nick has just said, that my PhD area of study is vocal pedagogy through the lens of the publications of Domenico Corri, one of the many Italian musicians who came to work in Britain in the late 18th century, and I've been totally distracted from this by my obsession with this one song. So within the PowerPoint slides are links to video recordings, which there isn't time to play just now, but if you'd like to, you can download it, although I wasn't able to put it in the chat box and peruse it at leisure. I don't know whether Nick can drop it into the chat for me. Slide 2. Oh, no. There we go. So, Auld Lang Syne and the Red, Red Rose. So the Scots Musical Museum was published in 6 volumes between 1787 and 1803 and is still regarded as the greatest collection of the national airs of Scotland, and Burns either wrote or revised The Slave's Lament to contribute to volume 4. In this slide, we see the original version of Auld Lang Syne, the most famous of all songs that's sung the world over as bells and fireworks herald each passing new year. The collection also includes My Love is Like the Red, Red Rose, which typically appears in millions of wedding ceremonies and billions of Valentine's cards. The Scots Musical Museum, song number 384. So let's listen to the lament. I'm going to attempt to play a lockdown home recording that I made last year from this end. Please join in. As you can see the music on the screen, the second half of each stanza is repeated as a refrain, and the recording is a tone lower than you see on the screen.
It was in sweet Senegal that my foes did me enthrall, for the lands of Virginia, Virginia, torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh, torn from that lovely shore, and must never see it more. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh. All on that charming coast streams forever flow, and their flowers forever blow. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh. Their streams forever flow, and their flowers forever blow. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh. The burden I must bear, while the cruel scourge I fear, in the lands of Virginia, Virginia, oh. And I think on friends most dear with a bitter, bitter tear. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh. And I think on friends most dear with a bitter, bitter tear. And alas, I am weary, weary, oh.
I first heard the Lament on Dougie MacLean's album of 1995, Tribute. The song has also been recorded and performed by musicians including Karine Polwart, Sheena Wellington and Christine Kidd. The last time I sang the song in public was at a Burns supper in Glasgow in 2019. However, an idea that I had to commission new works from Scottish composers using old songs, including the Lament, was met with concerns about cultural appropriation from my colleagues. So this idea has been shelved for just now. In fact, this was what set me to think and write about the song and its context. The white side of Scottish history, slide 4. Growing up in the Scottish borders, I knew only white-skinned people, and it was my English and Roman Catholic peers who seemed most exotic. And in terms of state school education, I've got no memory of learning about the American Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, slavery, or abolition. My school friends and I do, however, remember the original airing in 1977 of the ABC television drama Roots, with its shocking depictions of the atrocities of slavery. So much for post-colonial critical thinking in Scotland of the 1980s. In 2020, Edinburgh City Council added this information plaque to an existing prominent statue. Henry Dundas, 1st Viscount Melville, 1742 to 1811. At the top of this neoclassical column stands a statue of Henry Dundas. He was the Scottish Lord Advocate, an MP Tory for Edinburgh and Midlothian, and the First Lord of the Admiralty. Dundas was a contentious figure, provoking controversies that resonate to this day. While Home Secretary in 1792 and First Secretary of State for War in 1796, he was instrumental in deferring the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. Slave trading by British ships was not abolished until 1807. As a result of this delay, more than 500,000 enslaved Africans crossed the Atlantic. Dundas also curbed democratic dissent in Scotland and both defended and expanded the British Empire, imposing colonial rule on Indigenous peoples. He was impeached in the United Kingdom for misappropriation of public money, and although acquitted, he never held public office again. Despite this, the monument before you was funded by voluntary contributions from British naval officers, petty officers, seamen and marines, and was erected in 1821 with the statue placed on top in 1827. In 2020, this plaque was dedicated to the memory of the more than 500,000 Africans whose enslavement was a consequence of Henry Dundas's actions. Dundas delayed William Wilberforce's parliamentary motion for the complete abolition of slavery by British subjects. He proposed that a vote for immediate effect would be defeated, as was the case a year earlier, and that the motion should be amended to add the word gradual. The House of Lords sidelined the 1792 motion until the Slave Trade Act of 1807. How often would this have been the conversation topic or conversation stopper in Edinburgh's coffee houses? Slide 5, petitions. This slide shows a notice from the newspaper The Caledonian Mercury calling for folk to attend the Hunters Square coffee house before the closure of the time window for signing a petition. Janet Starkey writes, between January and March 1792, the Scottish anti-slavery writer William Dixon of the Society at Edinburgh for the purpose of effecting the abolition of the African slave trade prodigiously canvassed church congregations and Quaker meeting houses, customers and intellectuals in the coffee houses and universities, and Edinburgh newspapers such as the Mercury and Edinburgh Evening Courant. The result was a massive petition that was sent to Parliament with almost 11,000 signatures. Slide 6, Graham Fagan and Sally Beamish. My attention was brought to a recorded performance of a black singer performing the Slave's Lament. This was in Graham Fagan's 2015 Venice Biennale installation, where the reggae artist Ghetto Priest sings, accompanied by music provided by Scottish composer Sally Beamish and played by members of the Classical Scottish Ensemble. The musicians play and sing from screens displaying prepared audio and video recordings, as though to prophesy the performance medium for the COVID-19 pandemic. Slide 7, Jamaica Sings Robert Burns. Another innovative reading of the song is from the Jamaica Sings Burns project, again from 2015. This version departs from the Scots Musical Museum text by swapping Jamaica for Virginia and brutal whipping post for bitter snow and frost. Earlier this year, BBC4 showed a 35-minute film, Angelou on Burns, which Dr. Maya Angelou herself wrote and presented in 1996 originally. The film was made to commemorate the bicentenary of the death of Robert Burns, and Angelou herself says, "He was the first white man I read who seemed to understand that a human being was a human being, and we are more alike than unalike." During the film, Dr. Angelou works with a class of students on the poem, reciting the first verse herself, deliciously reveling in a very Scottish-sounding rolled R on the word torn. And this occurs shortly after she states that the lament is a perfect example of the ways in which a poet transcends race, time and space. We hear the third verse a little later in the film, sung by Glasgow University's now Professor of Critical Studies, Kirstine McHugh. Inconsistencies, and how high, how low. So the lament was published the same year that Dundas petitioned to alter Wilberforce's parliamentary motion, with the poem's first line appearing in the index of songs contributed by Burns, in essence, written, revised, or collected by him. This is similar to Auld Lang Syne in that Burns's name does not appear by the title of the song. In fact, Auld Lang Syne is completely omitted from the index pages altogether. William Stenhouse wrote in his accompanying notes to the museum, "The words and the music of this song beginning, 'It was in sweet Senegal that my foes did me enthrall,' were communicated by Burns for the museum. The air, it is said, is an original African melody." The University of Glasgow's editing Burns for the 21st century draws the parallel between the Lament's year of publication and the presentation of 519 abolitionist petitions to the House of Commons, but stopped short of naming Burns as author. No one seems to know the exact source of the song's haunting melody. Could it have come from Robert's own pen, or was it brought from elsewhere by a travelling musician? The singer Sheena Wellington suggests a variety of sources: the Roxburgh Ballads, an Eastern European tune entitled Rachel's Lamentation, a 12th or 13th century Spanish Sephardic melody, as well as its being today recognisable to people in North Africa and Mali. Regardless of its provenance, the melody is more singable than other tunes in the Scots Musical Museum, which can span a huge vocal range that terrifies even the most accomplished opera singer. Again, if we look at a song by Burns appearing after the Lament, number 385, to the tune A Gallic Air, which is in the middle of the screen, this ranges from B below middle C to a top G, giving an octave and a sixth, compared to the Lament's gentler octave and a third. Number 388 gives us King Henry VIII's tune Greensleeves. And again, the arrangement here is an octave and a sixth from the D above middle C to a shrieking top B flat. And even at late 18th century pitch, which is a quarter of a tone lower than today's concert pitch, this is not ideal for clear text declamation. Slide 9, the Trapanned Maiden. Professor Murray Pittock suggests in the critical commentary of the recent Oxford University Press edition of the museum that the origin of our lament may be an older ballad, the Trapanned Maiden, a mid-17th century English broadside ballad, and that the song's original context is with the plight of white Jacobite exiles. Slide 10, the Edinburgh Catch Club, or the Crochallan Fencibles. Who would have sung the lament? Italian opera singers such as the castrato Giusto Fernando Tenducci and the soprano Signora Labachelli Corri both worked for the Edinburgh Musical Society in the late 18th century and sang many Scots songs in public performances. George Thompson, a great friend of Burns, wrote, "At the St. Cecilia concerts, I heard Scottish songs sung in a style of excellence far surpassing any idea which I had previously had of their beauty, and that too from Italians." The Edinburgh Musical Society was down on its uppers by the time Volume 4 was published in 1792. So perhaps the singing was left to the gentlemen members of the Edinburgh Catch Club, just one of the many Age of Enlightenment societies in that city, who would meet to sing and drink after the concerts had finished, and to which the first 5 volumes of the museum were dedicated. Or was it the even rowdier Crochallan Fencibles who practiced then a sung solidarity with the voice in the lament? Although the poem is gender inclusive, there being no they, she, or he mentioned, the then voice of the slave would have been taken by a man, castrated or otherwise. So we know that Robert Burns chose the Slave's Lament for inclusion in the Scots Musical Museum collection while significant political events regarding slavery occurred. The song's exact origin is unknown, though scholars have traced some elements to the broadside ballad, the Trapanned Maid. The range of the tune is easily singable. It uses the Aeolian mode with a sharpened seventh to bring it into a harmonic minor scale, and it does not have the traditional A-A-B-B structure of many Scots tunes. In terms of performance, my personal preference is for voice-only renditions, but it also works well with the Scots Musical Museum bassline and diverse harmonies. Slide 11, Trapanned again. Incidentally, the words of the Trapanned Maiden can be made to fit the tune in the Scots Musical Museum. So why did Burns not go to Jamaica to take up his job in 1786? Maybe it was because of some resolution within his very complicated love life. It could be due to his early literary success, or was it a stand against the practice of slavery? Even if the Lament is not one of Robert Burns's original creations, he may well have found himself in a similar position as writers, musicians, and artists now do in the 21st century, who are seeking ways to protest against racism. And did Burns succeed with his protest? Well, if over 230 years later we're still talking, writing, and singing about this one song, then he most certainly did. And perhaps it's not necessary to establish the absolute authorship of the words and music of the Slave's Lament, simply because of his enduring usefulness to so wide a variety of musicians. So I don't know when I will sing the Slave's Lament again, but I've really, really enjoyed reading about it and listening to other musicians work with it. And in doing that, preparing this, my first ever conference preparation. And these are the references. Thank you very much.